Forged my name on the deed to my house while I was recovering from hip surgery, and by the time I came home, he had already changed the locks. I want to tell you how that felt. Standing on the front porch of the house I'd lived in for 31 years in November in Sudbury with a walker in the cold. But honestly, I'm not sure I have the words for it even now. I just stood there. I remember the wind coming off the lake and my daughter-in-law's car in the driveway and the little ceramic cardinal I'd hung by the door every winter since my husband passed. It was still there. Everything looked the same, but the key didn't work. Let me back up. My name is Marguerite. I'm 73 years old. I worked for 32 years as an administrative assistant at a school board in Northern Ontario, raised two children mostly on my own after my husband Raymond passed from a heart attack in 2009, and I paid off this house, every single cent of the mortgage, in 2017. That was one of the proudest days of my life. I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the final statement from the bank, and I just cried. Happy tears. The kind you only get when something took you a very, very long time. I told my son. He seemed pleased. He said, "Good for you, Mom." His name is Garrett. No, wait, I need to stop myself. Let me not use his name for a moment. I'll call him my son because right now that's all he is to me. A son. My son, who I loved with everything I had, who I drove to hockey at 5 in the morning, who I sat with through the night when he had his appendix out at age 11, who I lent money to twice. No questions asked, because that's what you do. That's what a mother does. My daughter Simone lives out in Kelowna now with her husband and their two boys. She calls every Sunday. She's the reason I found out what happened, but I'm getting ahead of myself. In August of last year, I had a fall. Nothing dramatic. I stepped off the back deck wrong and landed hard on my hip. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't bad, because it was. Surgery the next morning, then 2 weeks in hospital, then 6 weeks at a rehabilitation facility on Paris Street. I hated every day of it, not because the care was bad. It wasn't, the nurses were wonderful, but because I kept thinking about my house sitting empty. I'd left in such a rush. I hadn't even turned off the coffee maker. My son offered to look after things while I was gone. He'd been having a hard year. He and his wife had sold their place in Barrie and were between homes, he said, just for a month or two, and could they maybe stay at my house while I was in rehab so nothing would go wrong with the pipes. It was October. That's a reasonable concern in Sudbury in October. I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. He had a key already. I'd given him one years ago. I didn't think anything of it. The 6 weeks passed. They were long and slow, and I did my physiotherapy every single day, and I was proud of how well I was doing. My physiotherapist, a young woman named Kezia, told me I was her best patient. I believed her. I wanted to go home. I was ready. My son picked me up. He was quiet in the car, which I put down to him being tired. He works in logistics, and the hours are strange. We pulled into the driveway, and I noticed the ceramic cardinal was gone from beside the door, but I thought maybe it had blown down in the wind. I didn't say anything. He helped me up the porch steps with my walker, and then he stood back, and I put my key in the lock, and it didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. I looked at him. He looked somewhere past my left shoulder. "The lock broke," he said. "I had to replace it. I've got the new key inside." He opened the door with his key, and I walked into my own house, and something felt wrong immediately. Not wrong like broken, wrong like rearranged. The furniture was the same, but things were in different places. There was a smell of a different fabric softener. There were boots in the hallway that weren't mine, his wife's boots, her coat on my hook, toys in a bin by the door that I recognized as my grandson's toys, except my grandsons live in Kelowna, so these must be from where? "Whose are those?" I asked. He said they were friends' kids. They'd had people over. I didn't push it. I was tired from the ride and my hip was aching and I just wanted to sit in my own chair. I sat down. He made tea. We talked about nothing for a while and then he left and I sat in my house and felt, for the first time, like a guest in it. I told myself I was being silly. I told myself it was the disorientation of being away for 6 weeks, the strangeness of coming back, the fog that comes with recovery. I've learned over 73 years not to trust my worst feelings on the day they arrive. I sleep on things. I did. The feeling didn't go away. Over the next week, I noticed more things. A drawer in my bedroom that I always kept locked. I kept Raymond's watch in there, and some documents, including the deed to the house, were scratched around the keyhole. Not broken, but scratched, like someone had tried to open it. The lock still worked. The watch was there. The documents were there, what I thought were the documents. I didn't look closely. Why would I? Then Simone called. It was a Sunday, our usual call. We talked about the boys, talked about her garden, talked about my recovery. And then she said, almost casually, "Did you know there's a title search on your address on the Ontario Property Registry?" I didn't know what she meant. She explained. She works in real estate, has for 15 years, that she'd been casually looking something up and my address had come up with a recent activity flag. She'd checked it properly. She said she thought I should look into it. I called the registry office on Monday morning. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my reading glasses and my phone, and I called them. Not really worried, just calling to check, the way you check a noise in the middle of the night because it's probably nothing but you have to know. It wasn't nothing. The woman on the phone was very careful with her words. She said there had been a transfer of title recorded in September. I said I didn't understand. She said the property, my address, my house, had been transferred into a joint tenancy with another name, my son's name. I asked her to repeat that. She did. I said, I didn't sign anything. She said she couldn't discuss the details, but I could request a copy of the registered documents. I hung up and sat very still for a long time. The coffee went cold. Outside the window, a squirrel was doing something frantic in the maple tree. I watched it and tried to think. In September, I had been in the rehabilitation center on Paris Street. In September, I was doing physiotherapy twice a day and eating dinner in a common room and calling Simone on Sundays. I was not signing documents. I was not signing documents. I was not at a notary. I had not transferred anything to anyone. My hands were shaking when I called my daughter. Simone didn't panic, which I needed. She's practical in a crisis, always has been, even as a little girl. She said, okay, first thing, get the documents. Don't say anything to him yet. Get the documents first. I requested them that day. They arrived by mail 4 days later in a white envelope, and I opened them at the kitchen table, alone, because I didn't want to do it any other way, and I read them twice, and there was my name, and there was a signature that was not my signature. I know my own signature. I've been signing my name for 60 years. I know the way the M curves in Marguerite. I know the way my last name trails off at the end. This was a copy of it, a careful copy, but it wasn't mine. The notary listed on the document was someone I had never heard of, an address in Barrie. I called Simone again. I cried this time, the kind of crying where you're not sad so much as shattered, or something has broken in your understanding of the world. Because this wasn't a mistake. Mistakes don't look like this. Mistakes don't have a forged signature and a notary in Barrie, and a timing that lines up perfectly with the 6 weeks I was away. Simone booked a flight for the next morning. She arrived at noon, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I cried happy tears over the mortgage payout, and we went through everything. She took photographs of every page. She called a lawyer she knew, a woman who specializes in real estate fraud, and she got me an appointment for 2 days later. I didn't contact my son. Not yet. The lawyer's name was Miss Osei Bonsu, and she had an office downtown, and she wore reading glasses on a chain, and she made me feel, for the first time since I'd opened that envelope, like things might be okay. She looked at the documents for a long time. She asked me questions. She asked if I had ever been to Barrie in September. I said no. She asked if I had ever met the notary. I said no. She asked if my son had ever had access to documents with my signature on them. I said, and this is where I had to stop and breathe. I said yes. I had given him a copy of my will years ago. I had given him documents with my signature on them. I had trusted him with things. She said she would be filing a complaint with the Law Society and recommending we contact the Ontario Provincial Police. She said what had been done was fraud, a criminal offense. She said it in a very quiet, very steady voice, and I nodded, and I thought about the hockey rink at 5 in the morning and the night with the appendix and the money I'd lent him. No questions asked. The police took a statement from me the following week. The officer was kind. She told me this kind of fraud, family members forging signatures on property documents, is more common than people think. That didn't make me feel better exactly, but it made me feel less alone, less stupid, because I had been feeling very stupid. When the investigation became official and my son was contacted, he called me. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I listened to the voicemails. In the first one, he was confused. He said he didn't understand what was happening. There must be a mistake. In the second one, 2 days later, he was upset. He said he'd done it to protect me. He said property values were going up and he'd worried about what would happen to the house if something happened to me. And he just wanted to make sure I was protected. He wanted to make sure I was protected. I stood in my kitchen and listened to that voicemail twice, and then I put the phone face down on the counter, and I looked out the window at the backyard, at Raymond's old shed, at the apple tree we planted together the year my son was born. And I thought, he knew I was alone in that rehabilitation center. He knew I was vulnerable. He knew I trusted him. He chose that moment. He chose those 6 weeks. He planned it. I called Ms. Osei Bonsu and told her I was not interested in settling privately. I wanted it corrected to the proper legal process. All of it. What happened after that was long and exhausting in the way legal processes always are. There were documents and statements and delays and a court date that got pushed twice. My son retained a lawyer. His wife stopped answering my calls. My granddaughter, his older daughter, she's 15, texted me once to say she was sorry, and that small thing undid me completely. I had to sit down on the stairs and cry for a while. The fraud was confirmed. The notary in Barrie, who turned out to be a former colleague of my son's wife, lost her license. My son was charged with fraud over $5,000 under the Criminal Code of Canada. The title was corrected. My name, only my name, went back on the deed to my house. He received a conditional discharge, 2 years of probation, community service hours, and he was ordered to pay my legal costs. No criminal record if he completed the conditions. Simone was furious. She called me the night after the sentencing and she said things I'll choose not to repeat here because she's my daughter and her anger was justified and it was private. I let her say all of it. I sat with my own feelings for a long time after. I'm still sitting with them if I'm honest. There's no clean ending to something like this. I used to think the worst betrayal was when someone took something from you. Now I think the worst betrayal is when someone takes something from you and they had your absolute trust while they were doing it. That's the part that doesn't heal the same way a hip does. I went back to the registry office in the spring after everything was finalized just to hold the new document in my hands. The clerk was a young man and he had no idea why I might be emotional about a piece of paper, and that was fine. I thanked him and I walked out into the April sun and I stood on the sidewalk in downtown Sudbury and I breathed. The ceramic cardinal is back by the front door. I found it in the garage, wrapped in a cloth. He'd put it away, presumably to make room for his things, and then he'd put it in the garage instead of throwing it out, which I don't know what to make of. Maybe some part of him was careful with it. Maybe some part of him knew. I planted a new apple tree last month. The old one didn't make it through the winter, too much ice in February, and I stood there looking at the bare stump for a while before I decided. Then I went to the garden center and I asked the young woman there what kind would do well in this climate, and she helped me pick one, and I brought it home and I planted it myself. It'll take years to bear fruit, I know that, but I have time, and this is my ground, and I know whose name is on it. I keep thinking about the moment I stood on that porch with my walker in the November cold and put my key in the lock that no longer recognized me. I didn't know yet what had happened. I only knew something was wrong. And I think that instinct, that quiet, insistent feeling that something is off, is worth listening to. I spent too long telling myself I was being silly. What my son did was not an accident. It was planned. He watched me go into that rehabilitation center, vulnerable and trusting, and he chose that window. He knew I believed in him completely. And I think that's the part I have to sit with honestly, because the truth is that my trust, as unconditional as it was never a flaw in me. The flaw was in what he chose to do with it. Those are two very different things, and it took me a long time to stop confusing them. There's a cause and an effect to all of this, and I don't mean that in any mystical sense. I just mean that the choices he made set off a chain of consequences he couldn't control once it started. The forged signature led to an investigation. The investigation led to charges. The notary lost her license. My son will carry a conditional discharge and a probation order for 2 years. None of that happened to him randomly. It happened because of what he chose to do on the days I was learning to walk again down a corridor on Paris Street. Actions have weight. They always do. Eventually. What I'm prouder of, and I don't say this lightly, is how I handled it once I knew. I didn't confront him in anger. I didn't make accusations before I had the documents in my hands. Simone told me to get the facts first, and I did. I called the registry office. I requested the paperwork. I found a lawyer. I made decisions from a place of clarity rather than fear, and that steadiness, I think, is what made the difference. It would have been easy to fall apart. Lord knows I cried enough, but I kept moving forward, one step at a time, the same way I'd done my physiotherapy, not because it felt good, but because it was necessary. I want to say something to anyone who might be in a situation like mine or watching it happen to someone they love. Please don't wait. Please don't talk yourself out of what you're seeing, because the person doing it is someone you raised or someone you've loved for decades. Your instincts are not paranoia. Your name on a document means something. Your house, your savings, your rights. These are not small things, and you are not being difficult for protecting them. Get the documents. Call a lawyer. Talk to someone you trust. Then act. I planted a new apple tree this spring. It'll take years before it bears anything, and I know that. But I'm not going anywhere. This ground is mine. I know whose name is on it now, and I made sure of it myself. That's the thing about standing back up. No one can do it for you, but once you do, no one can take it back either.